It's a great pleasure to be speaking to you all today at today's Trend Summit. I'm Charles, co-founder of The Food People, and I'll be introducing you to the top 10 trends of influence for 25-26. And for Trend Hub subscribers, I'll be pointing you to the granular supporting detail that you'll be able to access from today on the Trend Hub platform, as well as highlighting some of the subject matter experts that will be exploring many of the trends that we talk about today in greater detail. And Shakufa, the Food People's Head of Insight, joins me to have some discussion around these trends as well. So welcome, Shakufa, as well.
Hi, Charles. Great to be here.
Cool. So let's dive straight in. Um, Before we get into the detail of the food and beverage trends themselves, just wanted to reflect for a moment and go bigger picture. And just explain, when we develop the trends framework, our team of experts look for those common social and cultural threads that define the broader era, if you like, that we're in. I think we can all agree it's been quite a couple of years, from the 2023 driver of under pressure to 24 last year, adapt to thrive. And there are plenty of reasons, I think, to be optimistic. There's a level of confidence returning. Inflation is at its lowest level for a couple of years. Price increases are stabilizing. Compared to the last 2 years, the next two are likely to be less unprecedented, but we should continue to monitor closely those forces that have the potential to derail, things like evolutions in geopolitics, natural disasters, conflict. And we should also be mindful that whilst inflation has eased, food and drink is still more than 25% more than it was, more expensive than it was a couple of years ago. And some 50 to 60% of UK consumers in particular are either struggling or just managing financially. So yes, many of the influences have normalized, but we should remain agile in food and drink. And that really, I guess, sets up the 25-26 overarching social and cultural driver. That is finding balance. So, finding balance. Amelia is going to be exploring this in more detail in today's summit. But just to give you a flavour for that, in summary, this is about finding the solutions that will return that equilibrium, that balance to our lives and how we live. We're breaking down some of those historic status quos to create perhaps a more meaningful and mindful way of living. And this may be through making sure that when we spend, that it's really worth it. Redefining, I guess, the joy in the simple or small things that we do, or making sure that we coexist a little bit more meaningfully. Moving from just being consumers to perhaps going back to being citizens. Keeping it real and making making sure that the things that we do, if we don't agree with them, that they're not carried out in our name. And we therefore may also choose to not necessarily partake in absolutely everything that is offered to us. Opting, I guess, to live a little bit more wisely, and rather than feeling that we must do or have everything, instead living out the concept of JOMO, so the joy of missing out. We're going to talk more about that later on. So that, I guess, summarizes what finding balance is all about. So the 25-26 trends framework made up of that one global driver, finding balance, that we've touched on there and that Amelia's going to talk about in more detail. Then around that, those four social and cultural forces for the ages, eat happy, smart spend, and keep it real. Then the outside of the wheel, 14 food and beverage megatrends with over 100 trend manifestation. And this framework is really designed to bring some clarity to the future horizon, to see those opportunities that exist within it. And as you'll appreciate, the framework even more complex this year because there's an awful lot going on, an awful lot to tell. That would be a lot to go through in 50 minutes. So what we're going to do is share with you the top 10 trends of influence for 25-26. But before I do that, if you're new to our annual trend predictions, you might be asking, how do we do this? And why is it important? Evaluating and acting on what the future holds is critical. Building future trends and foresights into your strategic planning, your innovation, and your renovation programs is a prerequisite to maintaining competitive advantage, relevance, and also, of course, mitigating risk as well. We really passionately believe that you shouldn't be intimidated by the future. What we need to do is understand what's happening now and on that future horizon to harness its potential for growth. And our expertise lays in the identification of the patterns, the themes, the shifts in behaviour that anticipate that change, and critically why it's happening, to make that expert informed predictions in food and drink from the global drivers that we've talked about, social and cultural forces, food and beverage megatrends, cuisines, ingredients, and much, much more. We do this with our IP-based research methodologies that leverages both global intelligence and human wisdom at the same time to decode millions of qualitative signals of change across the world of food and drink. In fact, investing over 26,000 hours a year applying contextual industry understanding, that industry knowledge, but also experience, culture, creativity, emotion, ethics, a lot of stress testing and critical debate, and some intuition in there as well. And we apply all of that to that raw intelligence to not only identify the trends, but why they're manifesting. And this approach applies to all of the work that we do. But here today at the annual Trend Summit, it provides that strategic trend and foresight framework that are very much anchored in the why, ensuring that you're best placed to flip the trends and the foresights of tomorrow into opportunities for the future, to shift the future of food and drink. So back to the top 10. Here they are. They've been developed from that master framework that I had on the screen a few moments ago by looking at how these trend themes have evolved in recent years and our understanding of wider social culture, politics, economics, and the likely influence of these trends, the challenge of the disruption factor on food and drink over the next couple of years. And what I'm going to do is bring these to life with you in a little bit more detail, reference some of the speakers that are going to be talking about them, and pointing you to the supporting resources on Trend Hub. But before I go into the detail, what I'd like to do is share with you a short introduction in the form of a film, just to give you that overview. So here's the top 10 for 25-26 in film.
JOMO, the joy of missing out, aka JOMO, is all about enjoying the here and now and not worrying about what's happening beyond your own front door. After all, who needs to go out when you can have restaurant quality meals, top-notch cocktails and barista-grade coffee at home? Omnivore, meat eater or plant-based? Why decide? Many are now adopting a more flexible approach, and so traditional meat, fish, poultry and other animal proteins find their way onto the plates of even plant-centric eaters. But they take a less and better approach, taking into account provenance, welfare and sustainability. Big fusion. Fusion multi-cuisine cooking is on the rise as chefs from around the world share flavours, techniques and ideologies. And they aren't afraid to push the envelope. Jerk chicken burritos, lamb keema lasagna, pistachio guacamole and breakfast ramen. Anything goes as long as respect and deliciousness are at the core. Crave-worthy. Life's too short not to treat yourself from time to time, and when you do, why not go all out? This is not for every day. Over-the-top indulgence with the likes of gourmet chili dogs, raclette cheeseburgers, fully loaded Tex-Mex nachos and oversized chocolate bars. Pure and clean. Debate continues to swirl around the possible impacts of ultra-processed foods and forever chemicals on our bodies. And there's a lot yet to learn. Against this backdrop, consumers turn to products they know and trust. Typically fewer, natural, recognizable ingredients and minimal processing. Slim and trim, weight management is key to living longer and healthier lives. But one size doesn't fit all when it comes to how we maintain a healthy weight. Some turn to semaglutide drugs. Others look to intermittent fasting, trending diets, or lifestyle changes, with a little help from tech support in the guise of wellness apps, wearable monitors, and more. Prevent that waste. The fight continues to reduce food waste, and now the focus is on how to prevent it in the first place. Help is on hand via technologies that can extend shelf life, detect and reduce food spoilage. And prevention is also key when it comes to packaging waste, as brands find innovative new ways to go plastic-free. Sweet treats. These days our pennies may not always stretch to big blowout meals, so why not indulge with sweet treats instead? But not just any old sweets. Think homemade donuts, gourmet cookies, fresh-baked madeleine, and retro desserts like banoffee, pavlova, and lemon meringue pie. Snack attack. Snacking is on the rise as people adopt a more flexible approach to eating rather than sticking to 3 square meals a day. Cue a surge in snacking innovation across the fresh, frozen, and ambient aisles, from indulgent treats to functional bites. And the rulebook is out of the window for what constitutes a snack, as mini meals become a way of life. Instant noodles, savoury croissants, microwave dumplings, anything goes. New proteins. Advancements in plant-based tech are enabling more realistic protein alternatives, from whole cuts to stinky cheese. Meanwhile, technologies like precision fermentation continue to push frontiers of cell cultivation. In fact, protein is even being made from thin air. And it's not all about meat alts here, as these technologies are also being deployed to create groundbreaking sweet proteins.
So that's given you the headlines. Now for a little bit more detail on the top 10 and getting straight in there, taking it from the top with Jomo. I talked about that a few minutes ago. The joy of missing out. This is all about enjoying the here and the now. If you like, this is the emotionally intelligent antidote to FOMO, the fear of missing out. It's essentially all about being in the present, being content with where you are now and not worrying about what's happening beyond your immediate vicinity. It's about savouring your sanctuary. After all, who needs to go out when you can have restaurant quality meals, top-notch cocktails, Bristol grade coffee, and much, much more at home. We know that things have been a bit tough over the last few years, and there are plenty of reasons to still seek safety, sanctuary, comfort, but perhaps better quality, more refined propositions with elevated end benefits in the home. We also know that there are societal and employment pressures to return to the office more of the time, but Jomo is fueled by what are still millions more in-home occasions that exist compared to pre-pandemic. So for Trend Hub subscribers, you can get into the detail of this within the high-level mega trend of home is best, and it's anchored in the social and cultural driver smart spends. So what's it all about? Well, firstly, it's about experiences rather than experiences, which leads us into easy entertaining. And easy really is what this is all about. So entertaining that is themed, perhaps cuisine, movie or cookbook. It might be about a grazing appetizer only entertaining, or frugal freezer feast as an example. Really lovely example middle right there are these sauce cakes to pump sauce onto pizza or to pasta, to make it a focal point, to make it fun, but the focus here is on ease. Then we've got in-home happy hour, pre-portioned, ready to pour, bar quality cocktails, but also high proof, half proof, zero proof. Next generation kind of glass rims, the flavors, the textures, the inclusions, really going next level, as well as things like layers and foams, super fancy ice. Happy hour is now very much in-home as well as out of home. And that, whilst we're talking about beverages, segues really nicely into in-home cafe core, very much in full domination with microplot, heirloom retail coffee, but also much greater focus on the craft of coffee in-home, which up until this point has probably only really been possible out of home. So the real focus on grind size and crema color and extraction rate, all under intense scrutiny. This is also enabled by in-home innovations, tech-fueled innovations, so things like chai brewers and kombucha makers, but also in-home coffee taps as well, with the hot water just at the right temperature. Then we've got the Jomo Baker, really here, super nostalgic grandma pour, Pro-level, chef-level ingredients finding their way into the home baking space. Retro sheet cakes, Battenberg, traditional tea breads, scones, cookies. We're going to talk more about that later on. Brownies, no bake tray bakes as well. We've also got restaurant quality at home. Premium is very much back in play after a few years away. New waves of chef-driven ranges, a lot of global larder inspiration across fresh, ambient, and frozen, and collaborations such as the one on the top right example there. This is a dinner dessert combo from Momofuku and their bakery milk bar, and this is a soy and scallion noodle with chili crunch cookies as a combo. It's also about restaurant quality at home delivered. And we've got Amrita from Fast Fine US concept chain Wonder, who's going to be presenting it later in today's itinerary. So look out for that. And lastly, within this space, comfort bowls. Summer or winter, rain or shine, this is about hearty bowlfuls of sticks to ribs, hot and brothy, ramen, udon, rice noodles, congee, slow-cooked brodo, all of that. Super comforting bowl food that you eat with the bowl close to your face, one-handed. You've got a whole different experience going on there. So that is a bit about Jomo. Next up is omnivore, meat eater or plant-based. You don't even need to decide anymore. This fits brilliantly within our global driver finding balance. As part of our wider longitudinal food attitudes tracker that we run with Good Sense Research, we can see that we're still meat reducing, but not perhaps as much as we were, more 70-30 rather than 50-50. But the need and the desire is very much still there to engage with a moderate, flexible approach to meat reduction. And so traditional meat, fish and poultry and other animal proteins find their way onto the plates of even plant-centric eaters, some taking a less but better approach, taking into account provenance and welfare and sustainability. So this sits within that mega trend alt and plant-based and very much anchored in the social and cultural driver, keep it real. Many consumers are looking, as we've already established, to reduce their meat consumption. Perhaps not as much as they were, but still looking to reduce that meat consumption. And that exists on many levels. Simple one, swapping out meal centres, going for less but better meats, seeing meat as a treat, and as such buying into things like rare breed and regeneratively produced meats. Meat has really found its voice in the recent past and can now compete equally with the counter conversation to plant-based. But it's also about considering the plant and animal makeup of individual meal components. And this is a growing space where brands and processors are harnessing food processing technology, blending animal, plant, and cultivated elements to make it easier for consumers to make that switch without the compromise on eating quality and back of pack decks. So what are some of the things that we're seeing? Well, what we call balanced blends. So blends of, in some cases, roasted veg with grass-fed beef as an example. The Both Burger, a great example of that on the bottom right-hand side. This isn't necessarily new, but it's perhaps more relevant now in our journey of meat reduction, if you like. Plant and bone, so complementing plant proteins like wheat protein and pea and soy protein, but with beef and beef byproducts for a more sustainable protein beef. So you can see on the middle example there, the choppy example is a really good one, enhancing textured plant protein with beef tallow, bone broth, and collagen in one product. Mushrooms, mycelium, and mycoprotein, very much hitting the hybrid limelight, bringing those meaty textures, savoury umami, and good nutrition to the blended product party. And also within the dairy sector, harnessing extractions and milks from cereals and legumes with traditional dairy to produce lower carbon milks, cheeses, and butters as well. And then cell cultivation brands are ramping up their presence in the omnivore market, leveraging plants in their recipe or blending lab-grown protein with animal-based ingredients to bolster, amongst other things, commercial feasibility. So I think as we touched on last year, in last year's summit, the protein choice, it's not a binary one. There are many different motivations and many different product solutions to deliver against that evolving need. The protein landscape is more fragmented and will only increasingly become so into the future, and the need is increasingly nuanced. So there'll be a bit more on this later on. Next up, we've got big fusion, part of Eat Happy. Fusion really is no longer a dirty word. Multi-cuisine cooking is increasingly on the rise. Chefs from around the world share flavors, techniques, and ideologies. Big, bold flavors from disparate cuisines find commonality in fusion from a global pantry, producing innovative, exciting, and sometimes pretty challenging results. This is more than just a mere mashup of ideas. These creations come from a second or third generation experience, also knowledge, authenticity, prepared by cooks who understand the cuisine. In globally influencing capitals, in LA, in London, in Singapore, and more around the globe, increasingly chefs are embracing this third culture cuisine, mixing cross-regional influences from Asia, from Europe, Africa, and the Americas to create dishes that really are free of gimmick, but absolutely full of flavor. So this is comes from the heart of the megatrend No Rules and is anchored in the social and cultural driver that we call Eat Happy. So what's it all about? Well, Shakufa is going to explore the culinary and gastronomic side of this in the next session, but to give you a little bit of a flavour. This notion of big fusion is well understood by a new era of chefs and operators who, as I've said, are drawing inspiration from a truly global larder. Eats meets west, sweet meets savoury, but this is more than a mere mashup of ideas. It comes from a place of knowledge and authenticity. And for a generation, this space has been dominated by the Americana food genre, but there is far more in the big fusion stable now, and that starts with Italian. One of the world's most widely loved cuisines, and it's seeping into that global conscience. Italian staples provide a canvas for fusion. Pizza, pasta, but even flavors. Cacio e pepe, as an example, finds its way into dressings and crisp seasonings, and we've even seen it in cheesecake. Lasagna, that Italian staple, forms the basis of whole entire eatery concepts, but we're also seeing seasonal variations, new flavors. We're seeing it turned into balls in breaded patties. Other Italian formats such as risotto, but on the sweet side, tiramisu, maritozzi, bomboloni, all being contemporized and providing a global canvas, if you like, of which to innovate off as a base. In this particular space as well, Japan very much meets the world. Japan's cuisine moves from, and has been over a period of time, moving from niche through to mainstream. Globally inspired, endlessly inventive fusion dishes. Things like miso and matcha, for example, are now ubiquitous across global cuisines. And Japan's rich larder is interwoven increasingly with the cuisines of Mexico and India and the Levant and much, much more. And that leads to dishes such as snail gyozo, kombucha escabeche, as examples. And Japan's culinary heritage continues to be explored through new superstar ingredients. We've heard lots over the last couple of years from koji, but also salted shio yogurt, sudachi as an example. Some of those become the must-have ingredients on those globally inspired menus. It would be remiss in this space not to talk about Pan-Asian. It's no longer a dirty expression, and from the islands of Indonesia to street markets of South Korea, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, and many more. This region's rich larder provides a carte blanche for exciting flavour fusions that are free of geographical constraints. Things like Thai milk being considered as in kaya toast and croissant fillings as examples, also finding it in gelato. This and more can be found in the plethora of new openings that are specialising in South and Southeast Asian cuisine that are appearing in those highly influential and multicultural cities, LA, London, Toronto. Singapore, a city built on multiculturalism, could perhaps be considered a blueprint for this style, combining standout elements from many different food cultures to create its own singular cuisine. And lastly, Mexican-ish. We've got smashed tacos, breakfast burritos, al pastor pizza. The familiar flavors and forms of Mexico are now being ingrained into global cuisine culture, and we'd identify them as being seamlessly melded with one another to produce something that's identifiably Mexican, but assuredly not as well. Chicharrones are served with smoked Gouda and cheddar. Guacamole is spiked with wasabi and served with nori chips. The example on the middle right there, the Pakistani Mex example, is a really good example of this. Oh, and of course, Mexican comes of age with Nouveau Tex-Mex. Shikiva's going to talk more about that later on. And this big fusion approach doesn't just influence street and casual dining, but in fact, all levels of dining, including ultra high-end. We've got Chef Eric, the 3 Michelin star chef from restaurant Dionier, who's joining us later to talk about the future of fine dining. And he describes himself as a Danish chef that's French trained, but very much Japanese inspired. So this approach applies to all levels of food and drink. Next one to really get you salivating is crave-worthy. The act of eating isn't, as we all know, simply about sustenance. It's a source of comfort and intrigue and escapism and joy. When things are tough, we turn to food as a reliable constant, providing that dependable doses of crave-worthy pleasure to see us through the day. It's a source of nourishment in the most holistic sense. So when people eat, they choose to eat what makes them happy, and do so without excuse or apology. Why not go all out when you're out? This is not for the everyday, but these over-the-top indulgences with the likes of gourmet chili dogs and raclette burgers and fully loaded Tex-Mex nachos and oversized chocolate bars. This is very much rooted in the food and beverage mega trend of feed the soul, which is anchored in the cultural driver, eat happy. So what's this all about? Well, it's about go big or go home. That's really the message here. This is to appeal to diners that are looking for that all-out indulgence, but in a permissible form. Moderation plays no role here. It's all about unapologetic indulgence where calories don't count and pleasure is very much top of the menu. So things like oversized and overfilled, double and triple stacked, super sauced and decadently topped formats offer that momentary escapism, but also exuberant formats. Pizzas being served burrito style for dipping, or with an accompanying dip or deep filled with molten fondue, stuffed crust and toppings that run literally into double figures. Burgers that are triple smashed with trio of cheeses, hot dogs dipped, sauced and dressed. We see treat sandos as well, really coming into their own within this space. So with hot, crisp breaded elements, plentiful charcuterie. It's all about the layers and that kind of cross-section look. More pressed, more toasting, deep and overfilled, and also more seafood actually within a sando space as well. On the sweet side, we've got layered textures and repeated flavor profiles to really dial up that indulgence. Think about a croissant filled with pistachio paste, pistachio custard, and topped with pistachio nougat. And lastly, there's extra touches to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. A salad, perhaps it's dressed with duck fat. Chicken fat becomes caramel. Cheeses are grated, poured, melted, and layered on in abandon. That probably feels like a good place to pause just for a moment. Shikiva, I'm sure we're all salivating after all of that food talk.
Yeah, absolutely. That has all been so thought-provoking. I feel like I could spend a whole day asking a lot of the questions that have sprung to mind. I'll keep it to just a couple in the interest of time because we have so much more interesting stuff to get through still. I think just going back a couple of steps onto the omnivore trend, I mean, that really resonates with me. It reflects, I think, how a lot of people are eating, bearing in mind that center core that you talked about in terms of finding balance, not feeling, as you say, not feeling bound by binary definitions of meat or plant-based, feeling like they want the flexibility. They don't want to be told, sanctimoniously how they must eat. They want to eat how they want to eat. That all makes a lot of sense to me. I guess the question I've got is why do you think that's really coming to the fore now in the context of omnivore in particular? Because obviously plant-based has been such a hot topic for so long, and things like blended veggie and meat burgers have been around for a minute or two. So why do you think this is the year that people are doing that sort of pushback into not feeling so tightly bound by definitions and maybe saying, I do want to eat meat from time to time?
Yeah, I think it's like anything, food and the way that we eat. It's an evolution. There have been some headwinds, I think, that have faced that sort of all that raw excitement around plant-based, and to the point I suppose I touched on during the presentation where. There was a time where all of the share of voice around protein consumption was dominated. If we look back 3 or 4 years, by plant-based. But meat has really found that sort of counter conversation and able to talk about wholesome and real and natural and pure. There's a counter conversation around ingredients and perhaps some of the albeit plant-based brands are really starting to address, but those back of pack ingredient decks and the perhaps not being as clean as compared to a whole piece of animal protein. We've seen lots of ads and social content around that, and I think that's just made consumers, together with cost of living, where particularly added value plant-based meat substitutes were, kilo per kilo more expensive. It just made consumers kind of reevaluate, really. And, consumers are still saying that they want to reduce meat, but are perhaps looking for that slightly more sophisticated offer in the way that they do that.
Brilliant. I love that phrase, counter conversations. That makes a lot of sense. As you're saying, we're just still on the journey of this story, and there's still a lot more conversation yet to come about it. I guess it might actually, I have a feeling that that sort of idea of counter conversation might answer my next question to a degree. But it's about this crave-worthy trend that we just looked at around sort of OTT indulgence and go big or go home. Triple burgers or three types of cheese, hot dog towers, all of that kind of good stuff. I mean, I love this, especially as we go into the cold season and I want to tuck in being all Jomo and eat exactly what I want, when I want, how I want. I guess the question I've got is how does that tally up with the conversations that we're also seeing out in the sort of foodie sphere around the obesity crisis and HFSS and obviously all of the sort of the weight control debates happening? How does that make sense when we also know that all of that stuff is also relevant?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great question, and I guess one that we often talk about. And of course, trends themselves don't exist in isolation. And to everything that we see, there's very often a counter or a counter proposition to that at the other end of the spectrum. And as human beings, we have different needs at different times. But it segues really nicely, actually, into number five, if I may. Move on to slim and trim. And as always, there's an awful lot to say about health and well-being and longevity. Consumers, I think, as we know, are increasingly proactive. They're information hungry. They're craving detailed knowledge around food and ingredients and processing so that they can make more informed choices for themselves and for their families. And to that point, we've got 3 chapters, as you know, intimately, Shkufa, in our new trend book. Some 3 chapters, some 24 trend manifestations, spanning everything from health through the ages and stages to gut and glow up and energy and mind and brain. But here in this one within Slim and Trim, which is anchored in you are what you eat, is weight management, as you touched on there, which is key to living longer and healthier. But one size absolutely doesn't fit all. When it comes to how we manage our weight, some are turning to semaglutide drugs, others to intermittent fasting, trending diets, or lifestyle changes, very often enabled by tech support as well, whether those are apps, wearables, monitors, and much more. So this one of the top 10, number 5, very much anchored in you are what you eat, and within the cultural driver for the ages. And as we've touched on, managing weight has become a central focus for individuals, industry, and policy. There's over 1 billion people globally living with obesity, and the risks associated with that for personal health, but also the associated costs for global health services. And GLP-1 focused solutions are one of the growing strategies for weight management. This is you might call it a hunger quietening hormone that has the ability to improve appetite control, blood sugar, and weight loss. And you can stimulate GLP-1 either chemically administered by drugs or naturally by changes in diet that stimulate that hormone production. So there's a number of different considerations as this approach gains momentum. One is portion control, so meals and snacks and drinks that have a smaller portion control. They're suited to those on either on a natural GLP-1 diet or those that are medically regulating appetite through GLP-1. Also, dietary fiber, increasingly important in the broader health conversation, but from this perspective, increasingly important as well. Very much the unsung hero of weight loss and gut health to regulate blood sugar and appetite, as is protein. It's critical in maintaining muscle mass, which is often depleted as well as fat on artificial GLP-1 diets, but it's also a really important component within managing appetite and cravings as well. Gut health, we've got a whole sub-trend on gut health, but in this particular context, really, really important. Snacks, bars, things like sprinkles, like the one on the top right-hand side of the screen there. Prebiotics that feed the gut, slow down digestion, keep you feeling satiated, strengthening that gut biome to stimulate GLP-1 naturally. And also within this context as well, we've got chrononutrition, so the science of how our circadian rhythms impact our body's function, adopting eating patterns that are best aligned with our body's natural rhythms to optimize our metabolic health. So Slim and Trim, part of the picture when it comes to health and well-being. Lots more to explore within the predictions. And I guess that segues really, really nicely into Pure and Clean. I think, as we know, the debate is continuing to evolve around the possible impacts of ultra-processed foods and things like forever chemicals on our bodies, and there is an awful lot yet to learn. And against this backdrop, I think consumers are beginning to turn to products that they know and that they trust. Trust is really, really key here within Pure and Clean. Ingredients, typically fewer, natural, recognizable, minimally processed. So Pure and Clean, really anchored within the mega trend of you are what you eat within the cultural driver of for the ages. So what's new in this space of Pure and Clean? We spoke at length last year about UPF being one of the biggest disruptors in food and drink for a generation. Dr. Kevin Hall gave us his view on ultra-processed foods, what we know, what we don't know. 12 months on, the momentum has only grown. We know that consumers' knowledge base is building, albeit off a small base. Many are confused by this kind of industry term, feel that perhaps that it's for industry and for brands and policy to facilitate that understanding and to take the lead. So we're in the middle, really, of a steep, ultra-processed and hyper-palatable foods knowledge curve. There's a huge amount of research happening globally that will catalyze a shift towards healthier, more transparent and minimally processed options that we can trust. but it's going to take some time to really get into that and to complete those studies. Transparency and honesty really is becoming key factors in consumers' decision making. And scrutinizing ingredients, and generally the fewer the better. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and there were a couple of members on a panel discussion that was advice to the audience was, consider your back of pack, considering how you're processing as a general rule of thumb and what you're putting in your ingredients. And on meal suggestions, meal inspiration sites, a real focus on 3, 4, 5 ingredient meals, focus on recognizable, minimally processed and whole ingredients. Those are the ones that are really being shouted about and talked about. Plant-based meat substitutes, really taking note on this front. Beyond Meat, the example on the bottom right-hand side is a really good one. But also, Lurpak's a new plant-based butter alternative, very, very clean deck. Example on the top right there, this is an example from the Tiny Tummies Instagram account. You can see there them positioning one pesto against another and talking about the switch from one to another based on the number of identifiable ingredients that are in there. Consumers need support in making these choices and swaps, and are in turn turning to different information platforms and apps to aid this knowledge build and to identify the products that are most relevant for them. A really good example of that is the app Yuka. But it's not all about the ingredients, but there's also a growing understanding of the impact of PFAS, and they're a group of synthetic compounds that have been used in various industrial and consumer products for many, many years. But they've been dubbed the forever chemicals because they're extremely persistent in the environment and the human body. And human exposure to these elements, either through drinking water, absorbed through the skin, or through food and drink, they've been linked to a range of health issues, including the risk of increased risk of some cancers, reduction in fertility and birth defects as well. So the momentum behind that is also beginning to build as well. As part of the pure and clean conversation, things like next generation sweeteners. There was a lot of controversy a couple of years ago about artificial sweeteners. That has led to innovation, research in things like sweet proteins, novel plant extracts, and fermentation derived sweeteners. That's all really, really intensified. So lots going on in that space. Reduced salt solutions, that faithful ingredient, we know it contributes to flavor. Removing and reducing salt is complex, but some of the solutions really now are quite compelling. Seaweeds, herbs, spices, yeast extracts as well. But also within this pure and clean conversation, we've got whole animal protein. We've already mentioned this, but animal-derived meat is increasingly being viewed as the unprocessed one, the wholesome one, the nutrient-dense alternative. And lastly, we've got healthy and sustainable diets that really fit within this space. This is very much the tomorrow problem that meets the today priority. I'm not going to say too much more on this now because we're going to have a panel discussion later on healthy, sustainable diets within today's program with James from Bite Back 2030 and Kate from Future Food Movement and Various Strategies and Steve from Nomad. So that is pure and clean, which leads us really nicely, I think, on to the next one, which is prevent that waste, number 7. Because food and packaging waste stats continue to make really, I think, quite difficult reading for industry. Consumers, brands, the scientific community are really paving the way for some meaningful reduction. The fight continues to reduce waste, and now the focus is on how to prevent that in the first place. Help is on hand via technologies, some of which we'll look at in a second, to extend shelf life, detect and reduce food spoilage. And prevention is also key when it comes to packaging waste, as brands find more innovative ways to go plastic free. So this sits within the megatrend waste and packaging, within the cultural driver, keep it real. So how is prevent that waste manifesting? Well, first, a focus on keeping it fresh. So smart labeling, real-time freshness, antimicrobial microbial biopackaging, date code countdown appliances, like the example top right there, that's a Samsung product that integrates AI visioning into the fridge to keep track of foods close to their expiry date. No waste for me, that's all about reducing waste at the point of consumption. So things like portion size control, more single serves, things like free flow frozen meal blocks, sauce blocks, herbs and spices. Sauces fit into that area as well. Also, just generally sort of smaller output recipes, cookbooks cookies for 6 cookies rather than 12. Um, Smaller wine bottles, that perfect pour for 4, really nice example as well. Keeping food waste in the food system is really important part of this with upcycled eat. So at one end, you've got ingredient recycling recipes in home. If you look at some of the incredible work that's happening in the bar and mixology space, much of that is being developed using waste from restaurant kitchens, being siphoned off into the bar area with mixologists really using that waste as a point of inspiration to produce some super exciting examples. But if we then go big scale industrial side stream waste innovation, used in things like precision fermentation, but also extraction of those key components from waste, things like protein and cellulose, lipids, polyphenols as well. We then got less but better plastic, so things like embossed branding, so no need for labels, things like laser etching, some really innovative takeaway lid solutions, to an extent, refill and return, self-separating packaging, recycled soft plastics, those types of things. Some major advancements in biofiber, so natural polymers that are from renewable sources for things like cutlery, egg boxes, container liners, punnets, as well as edible coatings on things like fruit and vegetables. Coatings on cucumbers is a really, really good example of that. Then we've got paper that's very much become the gold standard of eco-packaging, driven by meaningful innovation, which continues to gather pace in areas like beer, wines and spirits, snack bags, produce packaging, coffee pods. The example on the middle right of the screen there from the British Crisp Company, a really good one. Then lastly, glass and alley. So reduced, thinner, a focus on reducing and going sort of lightweighting on sort of empty products, lower melting points of glass, which is beneficial from an energy and environmental impact point of view at the point of production, but also the point of recycling as well. Slimline aluminium, again, laser etching, really relevant in this area as well. So that's a little bit about prevent that waste. Number 8, sitting squarely in Eat Happy, we've got sweet treats. I think as the saying goes, a little bit of what you fancied as you good. Very relevant for the modern consumer, taking that guilt out of guilty pleasures. Consumers are really opting for that indulgence in moderation. Talked about that with Q for a few moments ago, but really valuing those feel-good benefits from an occasional treat by choosing beautifully presented foods that are, well, just joyful. We're in an environment where value and impact is key, and money has to go further. So sweet treats really come into their own in this space. So the mega trend is treat time. Cultural driver, once again, is Eat Happy. There really is so much happening in this space. Good old cake, the permissible indulgence, a lot more focus within cake on aesthetics and visual appeal. They're absolutely everything, particularly the layer. Things like banana pudding makes a comeback, but things like baby bento cakes and walking cakes that are really designed for consuming in the out-of-home, on-the-move space. Things like cake sandos, also next generation no-bake and ice-box cakes as well. Donuts and buns. Donuts really are moving to a place of super polished presentations, fusion combinations, gourmet ingredients like crackling glazes and theatine and nicotine fillings, but also things like donut flats. We've seen donuts miniaturized, blended into drinks like the new Shake Shack milkshake product. Then we've got sweet buns that are things like maritozzi, style products that are overfilled, deep filled, dipped in ice cream, glazed, and adorned with all manner of ingredients as well. So donuts and buns are a really important part of this. Cookie craze. This is the forever almost food genre really that gets to 2.0. Lots of textural play in cookies, seeing them filled and topped. Also ultra luxe cookie cups, a lot of swavery and spicy, pull apart buckets, filled centers, also some adult combos as well. Ice cream. Um, Lots of new carriers. Of course, we've got waffles and wafers, but also ice cream in sweet bagel form, sweet bao, piped into croissant and Queen Amman, tacos and takoyaki. Lots of global inspiration, bite-sized, adult soft serve as well. Nostalgic puds, that just goes from strength to strength, recreated kidult favorites, more and more meringue and mallow, rice pudding, again, global flavor clash in this as well, things like cereal, milk, jelly, and custard. French patisserie, we talked about that last year, that the momentum behind that only can grows and gains momentum. Croissant really moving over now and making way for canale, madeleine, choux, Queen Amman, all with that sort of Pan-Asian larder overlay as well. And then we've got a lot of influence within the sweet treat and bakery space from Korean, things like bingsu, so shaved ice, yakgwa, which is Korean honey cake, bungeopang, which is a fish-shaped pastry, things like tissue bread, and other corn-based snacks and that type of thing as well. So lots of influence coming from South Korea within the sweet treat space as well. So that takes us really nicely, I think, onto the penultimate trend, number 9 of the top 10 that we call snack attack. So busy lifestyles are very much back, but time-pressed consumers aren't simply seeking convenience here. The dynamic list of demands holds things like health aspiration, diversifying palates, lifestyle changes very much in high regard, all underwritten by the necessity for value. And once again, the store cupboard and freezer very much prove their worth from a frugality point of view. Snacking is on the rise across the board as people adopt a more flexible approach to eating. So this particular number 9, snack attack from the top 10, sits in the megatrend time savers and the cultural driver smart spends. Again, lots to talk about here. So the fourth meal. These are additional eating occasions that have evolved due to broader societal forces, time pressure and lifestyle and working practices and technologies, from which we've already talked about today. Servings of food that allow food to be consumed anytime, anywhere, for that satiety. And within this space, we've got things like savoury bakes as an example. Savoury bakes really are the new brunch. We talked so much about breakfast and brunch, which is actually within the framework. Savoury bakes really are the new brunch. They're the umami-rich, meal-inspired, touches of heat for that all-day appeal. And the example on the top right there is a great one, that laminated Danish roll stuffed with shrimp powder, parmesan, and spring onion with a sweet soy and sesame glaze. That's from Bakehouse in Hong Kong. Then we've got the collision of frozen and snackification, transforming how we consider the freezer, affordable in-home, minimal meal prep, maximum convenience, minimal waste. And there are a number of key things that are making this super innovative space really evolve at pace, advancements in things like, and sophistication around air frying, but also thaw-to-eat concepts, quick microwave, but also frozen eat solutions as well. And within this area, within this whole snackification area as well, it's sort of much more cuisine driven, gourmet, handheld, lao bun, frozen bao is a really good example of that in the middle right example. Ambient, we talked a lot about this last year, but the momentum only builds. More gourmetization, cuisine-driven, more breakfast and lunch options, rice bowls, and freeze-dried within here as well. 5-minute meals, huge focus on social, noodles and dumplings, supercharged cookers that can cook even faster, super fast salads, air fryer hacks. Then we've got things like cups and jars, so instant noodles. They are the ultimate convenience 101, if you like. Just add water, heat and eat. Again, more gourmetization within this space as well. And it's really important to talk about super salads in a snack context as well. A new era of invention around Caesar, crispy rice salads, smashed roast potato salads, cucumber salads, DBS, which is the dense bean salad, loads of innovation and social noise around that. So the fourth meal time is a real meal time. And our final trend of the top 10 is new protein. The alts and plant-based sector is undergoing rapid technical revolution, taking the development of ever-sustainable products to new heights. So now it's about scale and whether consumers are ready. This sits squarely within the mega trend of alts and plant-based and the macro cultural driver, keep it real. So what do we see as the different elements of new protein? Well, we've seeded this earlier in this presentation, but new vegan frontiers, a huge focus on clean label, wholesome ingredients, nutrient density. In some cases, incorporating cell-derived ingredients into plant-based solutions, some quite advanced 3D sort of fiber architecture technology to make those whole cuts of protein even more ultra realistic. Then cultivated, so tech advancements in things like production processes, miniaturization of technology, growing media and structures that reduce cost and increase speed, a lot of ingredient and species development within cultivated and cellular as well. We've got increasingly see more public tastings, the regulatory frameworks are shared and are developed. And countries leading the way in this, obviously US, Singapore, Israel, but also Netherlands, India, South Korea, Australia. And Riley from the UK cellular meat brand Ivy Farm is going to be here later on in today's session to talk about what's next for cultivated meats. I'm not going to steal too much of her thunder. Protein from air. We talked about this last year, very much in its infancy, still is in its infancy, but it is gaining some momentum. Created by fermenting specialized microbes, carbon dioxide from the air, hydrogen derived from renewable powered water electrolysis, and minerals to produce a nutrient protein-rich biomass. So it'll be super interesting to see how this evolves over time. Then we've got seafood, well, not seafood, cultivated cells with plant-based ingredients being added. We'll also, compared to animal protein, more 3D printed fish alternatives, things like eel and shrimp and octopus. And also things like microalgae and konjac being used together in plant-based fish alternatives and caviars. And last up, we've mentioned it a couple of times as we've talked through the top 10, but fungi continues to have its heyday beyond just the fruiting bodies that we're very familiar with, but their use is flourishing in the alts space, where they're prized for their ability to generate protein quickly and at scale, using biomass fermentation techniques, mycelial biomass that can be grown with natural thread-like filaments, eliminating those sort of muscle fibers. Those can be liquefied and powdered or left as solid mass. They can be dried for the use in mycelium-based dairy-free yogurts, cheeses, and deli meat. So an awful lot happening within the fungi space, and often a lot of their use does not require regulatory approval as well. So a real plus point there. So I'm going to talk in a moment about how the top 10 sits as part of the top 20, but just thought take a moment of reflection there, Shakufa, and ask for your thoughts and interjections.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, so much thought-provoking stuff in there. I mean, my mind absolutely boggles at the idea that we can create protein from thin air. It's unbelievable. It's a brave new world. But speaking of actually brave new world, it's a great way to lead into a question I've got, which is actually rewinding back to the sustainability topic that we just talked about with the waste prevention trend. Obviously, as you said, the best way to reduce waste is to prevent it in the first place. And it's such a hot topic this year. And it's brilliant that, it goes from the very, day-to-day granular stuff like cookie mixes that make just enough for the family as opposed to a whole massive batch of dozens, to antimicrobial packaging, biofibers, all of that kind of stuff that really is sort of tech forward and science driven. And that's really brilliant. I guess the question I've got is that's obviously such an important aspect of the discussion around sustainability. But sustainability is such a big topic, and it is influencing so much consumer behavior in general. And one thing we've talked about in recent years a lot is the importance of soil health and regenerative farming, and how we come to sort of really know whether things are truly organic, avoid greenwashing, how people do the things that really move the sustainability agenda forward in those respects. Are those still a hot topic for consumers today as well? Is that still something that's really relevant for this year?
Yeah, it absolutely is, and I suppose it's relevant for consumers that are looking for those solutions. I think one of I mean, we've actually got Ed Lees joining us from Wild Farm to talk about this a little bit later on and around the commerciality of it. But I think, and some of the points that he will raise in his discussion around, how we badge this, how we communicate, how we educate, I think are really, really important ones. But I know there's a huge amount of work going on farms in industry to really get to those measurable on-farm benefits that we can communicate and trust. I think is super important in this space, as well as is commerciality. We've all seen through various TV programs and Clarkson's Farm and those types of things about actually how tough it is. We're used to seeing our food on the shelves of supermarkets and in restaurants, and many of us actually lose touch with the reality of actually what it's like. That sort of empathy and understanding with that world is very much coming to the fore, and the associated benefits of regen farming within that area as well. So the momentum is only growing, and a really important part of that is the commerciality of it, which Ed's going to talk about in the discussions later.
That's brilliant. That sort of makes me think back to our center core around finding balance. It's consumers also finding a balance between how they want to eat and, wanting food affordable and cheap and on shelves quickly, and then the reality of what it actually means for farmers to get it to plates and get it on shelves,
Yeah.
and trying to make sure we find the balance between those two things. One more question, if I might. I know we've got lots of other interesting stuff to get onto as well, but the other trend that really jumped out at me, and triggered a lot of thoughts is the one around snackification, which we just looked at. It feels inevitable that a big driver of that at the moment is people's obsession with their air fryer and TikTok and things coming through really fast and 5-minute meals and all of that kind of stuff. Do you think that trend, the snackification influenced by things like that, is a now trend, or do you think it's a forever trend? Do you think it's the beginning of a new way of eating for young people in particular?
Yeah, I do. I really feel that it is it's a forever. It's the beginnings, but it's a forever movement in that sort of casualization. I mean, we talk a lot about no rules and the breakdown of rules and the challenging of rules, and I think it is kind of part of that that sort of, we're in a food era where you can have what you want when you want it. And I see it particularly generationally. Anyone that's listening today that's got teenage kids, some of what they're free of perhaps cultural food norms, they'll just make choices about what they want in the moment. They will have like noodles for breakfast. They will have breakfast, what we would think is breakfast, at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and that is fine. It's just what they want, and I can see it, in my own home environment. More smaller meal occasions, rather than sitting down to, a big, bowl of noodles in the evening, just come home from school or college, a small bowl, feed, satisfy that craving perhaps for the next hour and a half, and then go on to have a smaller meal sometime in the evening after that. So I think it's part of a longer term shift, would be my view.
Yeah, I have to say I agree. And I think it really is backed up by the absolute sort of strength to strength growth of things like croissants and savory bakes and the sweet treats that you talked about. People are sort of doubling down on 11s and 4s and anything in between and after. Eat what you like when you like, basically, and lots of small meals is great if that's what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think your question about regenerative really sort of segues actually into the fact that our top 10, as always, exists as part of our top 20 in our quest, I guess, to make trends more digestible and simplified. And actually, number 11 is real regenerative. And as I mentioned, we've got Ed from Wild Farm is going to speak about that later on. But also within that top 20, we really can't get enough of eggs. Cheap, versatile, nutritious, budget friendly. There's so much. We talked about blank canvases earlier on. Some amazing new cookbooks out actually about what you can do with eggs. Seafood is really interesting. Seafood for all, so lobster, crab, and other shellfish, shedding that sort of elitist label. Lots more focus around kids and kids menus. One size absolutely doesn't fit all when it comes to feeding young people. Kids nutrition evolving from toddler through to tween. So too do their tastes and appetites, which are evolving at pace as well. Clean label remains a target for many parents as well, bolstering a surge in sort of 1, 2, 3 ingredient dishes for young people as well. Freeze dried, touched on that within the snacking space, but sort of fruit and veg for that sort of nutrient-packed alternative to crisps or freeze dried candy. Light, airy, crunchy, all at the same time, and sustainable credentials as well. For your age, I mean, I touched on that when I was sort of providing the introduction to the health trends within the top 10. This is not just about surviving older age. It's about feeling good every single step of the way. And there's a surge in innovation around targeted nutrition for varying different dietary and nutritional needs for different life stages, whether that's adolescence or midlife, pregnancy, golden years, but a huge focus in that particular space as well. And then we've got big on flavor, and that means things like flavor on flavor. So, croissants filled with croissant butter, extreme savory. So, PBJ chicken wings is an example of that. Complex spicing, things like margaritas with, jalapeno and coriander. Super sour twist, things like pickle pasta. But also we shouldn't forget things like better dairy. Good old-fashioned dairy continues its fight back against the alt challengers, very similar in the way that we see in the meat space as well. Provenance prevails in this area for good hard cheeses, but there's lots of noise around soft cheeses like cream cheese and ricotta and dairy-based dips. We shouldn't forget gourmet butter either, sweet, flavored, cultured, brown, you name it. And lastly, I guess number 20 is precision farming, as agriculture is increasingly digitized and tech enabled. We enter this sort of next stage of precision farming. So that gives you a sense of how the top 10 sits alongside the top 20. Everyone, all of you that are participating in today's event will be able to access the top 10 trends video that we played earlier in this segment, together with the top 20 downloadable trends infographic. A little flavour of that is on the screen there, as well as all the links to today's presentations and replay links at the end of this live broadcast at the end of today. In the meantime, thanks for listening. I hope that you found that thought-provoking, informative. I hope it sparked some thoughts and ideas and perhaps help make some of those connections to you in working out how you leverage this information to shift the future of food and drink. And for all you Trend Hub subscribers, I invite you to explore the granular detail within our 25-26 book, the articles and all of the supporting videos that go with the predictions, which will be available on the Trend Hub platform for the end of today. So from Shakifa and I, thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of our 25-26 Trend Summit. Thanks for listening.